Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at an Erqiaga EM62. This is a conversion of the M1 Garand to be a little shorter, to chamber 7.62 NATO, and to use M14 magazines. And it was done here in the United States in 1962 and 63. And it was done by a rather interesting character by the name of Juan Erqiaga. Now, Erqiaga was originally Peruvian. Born and raised in Peru, attended the Peruvian Military College. I'm not sure of the exact name of the institution, but he was a second lieutenant in the Peruvian military until 1951 when he emigrated to the United States and got a job with the Police Ordnance Company. Now, he probably heard about police ordnance and perhaps met Gordon Ingram in Peru prior to his move, because at that time, Police Ordnance was manufacturing the Model 6 submachine gun, which if you're interested in, I have a separate video all about, and Peru was one of the main customers for that. Wouldn't turn out to be a particularly successful endeavor for Gordon Ingram, but it did introduce him to Juan Erqiaga. So when Erqiaga moves to the United States, California specifically in 1951, he gets a job with Police Ordnance, starts working for them. Well, at the same time, or shortly thereafter, he starts getting into kind of some skullduggery related to Cuba. He starts supporting Fidel Castro's rebels who are trying to overthrow the Batista government. And one of the things he does in furthering this mission is he starts to set aside a specific secret cache of parts at Police Ordnance that he's going to use to help the Cuban rebels. Well, the law finds out about this. It's interesting. I don't know exactly what Ingram thought about all this at the time, although Castro didn't have the notoriety at that time that he does today. So you have to judge this by the period. Well, ultimately, law enforcement finds out about this. Erqiaga flees to Mexico just ahead of the cops, basically. Starts working on a simple open bolt 45 caliber submachine gun in Mexico, and ultimately ends up moving to Cuba. He's been helping or trying to help Castro and his rebels. When Castro wins, he moves to Cuba to help work on the domestic arms industry, to help, arm Castro's new government. Well, this all kind of falls apart within just a couple of years, because what Castro does instead is basically prohibit private ownership of arms in Cuba, and turns, instead of turning to domestic industry to produce arms, he instead turns to the Soviet Union to provide military assistance. And this leaves Erqiaga in a rather, well, he doesn't have a whole lot that he can do now. And it sounds like he kind of has a change of heart about Fidel Castro, or at least he says he does, because he defects. How legitimate that defection is versus, this just didn't turn out to be what I thought it would be, who knows? I don't have enough background on the man to say. But he defects, comes back to the United States in about 1961. He is, of course, he is a very charismatic guy, and he sets up a gunsmithing shop to start doing some work in City of Industry, California. And the very next year, we get this. So let's take a closer look at it. For all the sketchiness of Erqiaga's submachine gun work, the EM62 conversion appears to have been done really quite well, and it's remarkably forward-thinking. This is 1962 when these go into production, and they're made in 62 and 63. That's only 5 years after the US military has adopted the M14. He's got this set up for M14 magazines, and we'll touch on this in a moment, but he advertised that you could also get an alternative setup to use FN FAL magazines. I haven't seen pictures of one of those. I don't know if that was an advertising thing that never got made, or if they are out there just in small numbers, because the FAL wasn't exactly a common rifle in civilian hands at that time either. But it's a very interesting system here. The gun is not actually marked Erqiaga anywhere on it. The original receiver markings here are all from the original M1 Garand receiver that was converted. And you can see we still have some of the original stock cartouches and such as well. The clip release latch has simply been removed as it is no longer necessary or functional, because this doesn't use en-bloc clips, instead uses magazines here. The magazine release is a simple, almost actually AK type paddle. Pull that forward and magazine comes out. Standard M14 magazine, does not require any modification. The stock and the receiver have both been cut away to allow the magazine to fit in there, as has the floor plate here. We'll take a look inside this in just a moment. Probably the most distinctive other element on this gun is Erquiaga's gas block. He's moved this, of course, much closer to the receiver than on a standard M1, and it disassembles a little differently. Now, we've gotten a barrel that comes out significantly beyond the end of this gas block here. This is just under an 18-inch barrel, as opposed to the 24 inches of the original M1. So it is definitely lighter. This is about a pound lighter than an M14, for what that's worth. Some of these did originally come with a muzzle brake. In fact, if we look here at the April 1963 edition of Gun World, we have the Cuban answer to the M14, where they were talking about Erquiaga as being Fidel Castro's armorer, which I think is a little bit exaggerated. But there they have a picture of the full EM62, and this one has a muzzle brake that is clearly threaded and then pinned in place, as we see right there, and someone has removed the brake from this one. There's another picture of it right there. By the way, this magazine refers to this as the EMFA because these were also available as fully automatic rifles, or selective fire rifles, with about a 700 round per minute rate of fire, apparently. Now, that was because this was prior to 1968, so new machine guns could still be registered in the United States. The ones that I think the majority of the ones that were purchased were simply semi-automatic to avoid the $200 registration fee. As they say here, the conversion is about $30. If you wanted the full auto version, you'd have to tack on another $200 for your tax stamp. So that would not have been a popular thing at the time. There is a bolt hold open functionality, but it is only the follower of the magazine. So it will lock open like this. However, once I pull the mag, the bolt is going to drop back home. Also note that the receivers were not converted to add stripper clip guides, so this is only magazine fed, unlike the M14, where you could leave the magazine inserted and refill it via stripper clip. Disassembly is pretty much identical to an M1. We're going to pop the latch here. By the way, a pen fits nicely in there and can be a really helpful tool for those tight M1 trigger guards. Pull this assembly out, and then we also have this guy, which is the magazine catch block. Now, allegedly, you could get a different version of this that would fit FAL magazines, but like I said, I've not actually seen one. Once we have the trigger guard out, the stock just comes off as an M1 Garand would. Comparing the EM62 trigger guard to a regular M1 trigger guard, there are actually only two differences. One of them, of course, is that the EM62 has been cut out here to accommodate the magazine. The other is that this little spring right here has been cut off flush with the front of this, just so that it doesn't interfere with the magazine. Now, in practice, this magazine block is going to sit right up in here. Let's see if I can get that in there. There we go. Sit nice and flush right there. This pushes the magazine well forward, because remember that the M1 Garand is designed around 30-06. The EM62 has been shortened to 7.62 by 51, so about 12, the cartridge is about 12 millimeters shorter. And that space has been taken up at the rear, which pushes the magazine up to the front, which allows for better reliability than trying to add space to the front. So there's how that all sits together. Comparing the receivers next, you can obviously see how much this has been shortened. The original rear handguard was left intact, and basically the front handguard removed and the gas block moved back to be flush with the end of the rear handguard section. So that makes a convenient place to end it. You can keep the handguard, you can keep the keeper here. That all stays the same. Now, the gas piston has been changed to be just a simple straight style. It doesn't have a bend in it, a dog leg, like the M1 did, and we can disassemble this gas block very easily. It simply unscrews at the front here, and you can see the gas port
right there, right in front of the gas piston. The cap for the gas piston here is marked 0.100 and has what is, I presume, a 0.1 inch hole in it. That's to help vent gas, to help prevent overpressuring the system when you fire. That's basically identical in concept to how the Schuster and other adjustable gas blocks, or adjustable gas plugs for the M1 work. We have some other modifications that were made to the receiver. Of course, all of these parts have been removed. This is the whole clip feeding system. And of course, it's not necessary when you convert to box magazines. So instead, a front block has been added here that is going to serve as the front support for the magazine. We have a little tab right there that's going to act as a front magazine well support, as well as being the front end of the recoil spring guide rod. And you can also see that, for example, these grooves that the follower ran in have all been milled flat to give space for the magazine. Here's a view of the other side. This has been rounded off just slightly, and this whole block is really the biggest new addition to the EM62 receiver. And lastly, we have the stocks. Here's our M1 stock. Here's our EM62 stock. Pretty much the same changes you would expect. The front area here has been milled out, drilled out, cut out, to allow space for the magazine. And these little side supports have been cut down a little bit, again, just to make space for all the bits going on the inside. So the purpose of the EM62 here wasn't really so much to sell to the American civilian market. What Erquiaga was really hoping for was a big contract with one of the countries that had a whole lot of surplus, like military aid M1 Garands from the United States. In particular, he was hoping to sell this as a mass conversion program to his native Peru, perhaps. I've also seen indications he was looking specifically at Taiwan, which would make sense. Taiwan ultimately ended up adopting the M14 and getting the tooling to make them. But you can certainly see how, Taiwan has hundreds of thousands of M1 rifles, and hey, if you can sell them a cheap conversion instead of them buying a brand new, more expensive rifle, that could be a fantastic financial success for someone in Erquiaga's position. Didn't end up working out, of course. The next thing that he got himself into was what was designated the EM64, which was a 9mm submachine gun of very sketchy history. So it's kind of like a crude Sten knockoff, which, if you know the Sten, a cruder Sten is really kind of something. This was originally, the original order was 500 of these guns for Costa Rica for perhaps less than 100% legal purposes. This got the attention of the US, of the FBI and of the ATF, Treasury Department at the time, who were concerned and interested, and ultimately they ended up confiscating the whole batch of rifles. Erquiaga, under legal pressure, fled back to Peru in 1965, where he lived for the rest of his life. Ultimately, interestingly, it was the MR64, or the EM64 submachine gun, that first gave Gordon Ingram the idea to create his own M10 submachine gun, both the gun and the suppressor that went along with it. Erquiaga, one of the things he had been working on, kind of in private, in secret, was developing a suppressor for his 1964 submachine gun. Anyway, Erquiaga's machine gun ultimately didn't really come to anything. I think really the only surviving copies, surviving examples, are in government, like ATF's reference collection now. It'd be fun to take a look at one sometime. But it's very interesting that this did put Gordon Ingram on the path to developing his M10. So if you're interested in more of Ingram's work, I of course also have what I think is a pretty decent video on development of the M10 and M11 submachine guns, so I'll link to that at the end of this video. I'd like to give a big thanks to the viewer and fan who loaned me this EM62 to show to you guys. Not a whole lot of these were built, and they're really quite rare today. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.